Why the Platypus is Shy, a tale of embracing our unique selves. Exploring why the platypus, with its duck bill, beaver tail, and otter feet, often hides, we discover a creature so wonderfully unique it initially baffled scientists. This tale gently teaches young adventurers that embracing our own special qualities, even if they make us different, is a true superpower, just like the platypus's extraordinary charm. Dr. Miriam Chen had spent 15 years studying wildlife across 6 continents, but nothing had prepared her for the frustration of trying to photograph a platypus. She crouched at the edge of Willow Creek in eastern Australia, her camera lens trained on the murky water where she had spotted ripples just moments before. The morning sun filtered through eucalyptus leaves, casting dappled shadows across the stream bank. Somewhere beneath that dark surface swam one of nature's most remarkable creatures, and it wanted absolutely nothing to do with her. "Come on," she whispered, adjusting her position on the muddy bank. "Just one shot. That's all I need." The platypus, of course, did not comply. It never did. Miriam had been assigned to photograph Australian wildlife for a prestigious nature magazine, and while she had captured stunning images of kangaroos, koalas, and even a elusive cassowary, the platypus remained her white whale. Every morning for 3 weeks, she had stationed herself along various waterways, waiting with the patience that had served her well throughout her career. And every morning, the platypuses had vanished the moment she arrived. "They can sense electromagnetic fields," said a voice behind her. Miriam turned to find an older man standing a few feet away, his weathered face creased with amusement. He wore a faded flannel shirt and carried a battered fishing pole, though he didn't look like he was particularly interested in catching anything. "Excuse me," Miriam said. "Platypuses," the man continued, gesturing toward the water with his pole. "They've got electroreceptors in their bills. They can detect the electrical impulses of your heartbeat, your muscles moving. They know you're there before you even see them." Miriam sighed, lowering her camera. "That would explain a lot, actually." The man chuckled and extended his hand. "Frank Morrison. I've lived along this creek for 40 years, watched more platypuses than I can count." Miriam shook his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of decades of outdoor work. "Miriam Chen, photographer, currently failing at my job." "Don't be so hard on yourself," Frank said, settling onto a nearby rock as if he had all the time in the world. "The platypus isn't trying to make your life difficult. It's just being what it is, careful, private, a little uncertain about its place in the world." There was something in the way Frank spoke that made Miriam pause. He wasn't just talking about wildlife biology, he seemed to be speaking from somewhere deeper. "You sound like you know them personally," she said, attempting a joke. Frank smiled, but there was a melancholy in his eyes. "In a way, I suppose I do." He gestured for Miriam to sit, and despite herself, she did. There was something about this place, the soft gurgle of the creek, the whisper of wind through the gum trees, that made rushing seem almost rude. "Did you know," Frank began, "that when European scientists first received a platypus specimen, they thought it was a hoax? They actually tried to find the stitches where someone had sewn a duck's bill onto a beaver's body." Miriam nodded. "I've read about that. George Shaw, I think. He was so convinced it was fake that he took scissors to the pelt." "Exactly," Frank said. "Here was this creature, this wonder of evolution, and the educated world's first response was to declare it couldn't possibly be real, because it didn't fit into any category they understood." He fell silent for a moment, watching a dragonfly hover over the water's surface. "I think about that sometimes," he continued quietly. "What it must be like to be something that doesn't fit. To know that the world looks at you and sees a collection of mismatched parts instead of a whole being." Miriam studied Frank's profile, suddenly curious about this man who spoke of platypuses the way poets spoke of unrequited love. "Frank," she said gently, "you're not really talking about platypuses, are you?" Frank laughed softly, shaking his head. "Am I that obvious?" He shifted on his rock, his gaze distant. "I grew up about 30 kilometers from here. Small town, small mines. Though I didn't know it at the time. My father was a farmer, expected me to be the same. My mother was a schoolteacher, expected me to be practical. Neither of them knew what to make of a boy who wanted to paint." Miriam felt something shift in the conversation, a deepening that she hadn't expected from a stranger by a creek. I wasn't just artistic, Frank continued. I was odd in other ways too. I preferred books to football. I could spend hours watching insects when other kids were playing. I asked questions that made teachers uncomfortable. And I never quite felt like I belonged in my own skin. He paused and Miriam waited, sensing there was more. When I was 23, I fell in love with a man, Frank said quietly. This was 1975. In a town like mine, there was no category for that. No space in people's understanding. So I left. I came here, to this creek, and I bought a little plot of land where no one would bother me. Miriam felt her heart tighten. You've been here ever since? Frank nodded. 40 years of hiding, 40 years of being like the platypus, staying below the surface, only coming out when I was sure no one was watching. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with decades of loneliness. Miriam thought about her own life, the times she had dimmed her ambition to make others comfortable, the relationships she had left because her partners found her work too consuming, the constant negotiation between who she was and who the world wanted her to be. Frank, she said slowly, the platypus isn't just hiding. It's one of the most successful species in its ecosystem. It's been around for millions of years. It survived when dinosaurs didn't. Frank looked at her, curiosity flickering in his eyes. What do you mean? Miriam leaned forward, warming to her subject. The platypus has venomous spurs on its hind legs, one of the only venomous mammals on Earth. Its bill can detect prey in complete darkness. It can close its eyes and ears underwater and still hunt with perfect precision. Every single thing about it that seems strange is actually an incredible adaptation. She paused, meeting Frank's gaze. The scientists who thought it was fake were wrong. The platypus wasn't cobbled together from other animals. It evolved its own solutions, its own way of being. It's not a duck or a beaver or an otter. It's something entirely new, and that's exactly what makes it remarkable. Frank was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I've spent 40 years thinking I was broken, that the best I could do was stay hidden and hope no one noticed me. But people have noticed you, Miriam said. You're here, you've survived. And from what I can tell, you've built a life that works for you. Frank shook his head slowly. A life maybe, but not a full one. I've watched couples walk along this creek holding hands. I've seen families have picnics on the bank, and I've stayed in my cabin telling myself that being alone was safer than being seen. He looked out at the water, where the ripples had long since stilled. Maybe I've been hiding from the wrong things. Over the following days, Miriam found herself returning to Willow Creek, not just to photograph platypuses, but to talk with Frank. They would sit on the bank in the early morning or late evening, the times when platypuses were most active, and they would share stories. Frank told her about the paintings he had made in his youth, vibrant canvases full of color and movement that he had eventually burned in a fit of shame. He spoke of the man he had loved, Marcus, who had begged him to leave town together, but whom Frank had pushed away out of fear. He described the slow construction of his solitary life, the walls he had built so high that eventually he forgot there was anything on the other side. Miriam, in turn, told Frank about her own struggles. The photography career she had almost abandoned because an early mentor told her women couldn't handle the physical demands. The marriage that had ended because her husband couldn't understand why she needed to chase stories across the globe. The persistent feeling that she was too much for some people and never enough for others. We're both platypuses, Frank said one evening as the sun painted the creek in shades of amber and rose. Swimming around with our mismatched parts, trying to figure out where we belong. Miriam smiled. The thing is, Frank, platypuses don't wonder where they belong. They just exist. They swim, they hunt, they raise their young. They don't apologize for their duckbills or their venomous spurs. They just are. Frank considered this. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple, Miriam admitted. But maybe it's simpler than we've made it. Maybe we've spent so much energy hiding that we forgot to actually live. That night, Frank invited Miriam to his cabin for dinner. It was the first time he had hosted a guest in over 20 years. The space was small but warm, filled with books and worn furniture, And, to Miriam's surprise, dozens of paintings hung on every available wall. "I thought you burned them," she said, staring at a stunning watercolor of the creek at dawn. "I burned the early ones," Frank said, setting a kettle on the stove, "but I couldn't stop making them. So I kept painting. I just never showed anyone." Miriam moved through the room, taking in each piece. Landscapes, portraits, abstract swirls of color that seemed to pulse with emotion. The work was extraordinary, raw and vulnerable and utterly unique. "Frank," she breathed, "these are incredible. Why have you kept them hidden?" Frank shrugged, but she could see the color rising in his cheeks. "Same reason the platypus hides, I suppose. Safer below the surface." Miriam turned to face him. "The magazine I work for, they have an arts section. They profile undiscovered artists, people whose work deserves to be seen. Frank, I could—" "No," Frank said quickly, then softer. "No, I'm too old for that." "Too old for what? For people to see your work? For the world to know you exist?" Frank's hands trembled slightly as he poured the tea. "You don't understand. I've spent my whole life being careful, being invisible. The thought of people looking at me, judging me—" "They won't be judging you," Miriam said gently. "They'll be seeing you. There's a difference." Frank set down the teapot and walked to the window. Outside, the last light was fading from the sky, and somewhere in the creek, platypuses were emerging from their burrows. "Marcus used to say something like that," he said quietly. "He used to say that the people who matter don't mind, and the people who mind don't matter." Sounds like a wise man. He was. He died about 15 years ago. I heard through a mutual friend. Cancer. He never did get to see Paris like he always wanted. Miriam moved to stand beside him. "I'm sorry." Frank nodded slowly. "I've spent a lot of years regretting that I didn't go with him, that I let fear make my choices for me. And now here you are, offering me another chance to be seen, and I'm doing the same thing I did 50 years ago." He turned to face her, and Miriam was struck by the complexity of emotion in his eyes. Fear and hope, and something that looked almost like determination. "What if I said yes?" he asked. "What if I let you share my work?" "Then people would see the same thing I see," Miriam said. "A remarkable artist who's been creating beauty in solitude for decades. Someone who's been swimming below the surface, developing skills and depth that most people never achieve. Someone whose uniqueness isn't a flaw but a gift." Frank was silent for a long moment. "Do you really believe that? That being different is a gift?" Miriam thought about the platypus, that impossible creature that had confounded scientists and delighted children and thrived for millions of years precisely because it defied categorization. "I believe," she said slowly, "that the things that make us different are the same things that make us irreplaceable. The platypus could have evolved to be more like other mammals, more conventional, more recognizable. But then it wouldn't be a platypus. It would be something ordinary. And the world has plenty of ordinary." Frank let out a long breath, something in his posture shifting. "All right," he said finally. "All right, let's do it." The morning Miriam finally got her platypus photograph, she was sitting beside Frank on the bank of Willow Creek. They had been there since before dawn, not really talking, just existing together in the cool quiet of the Australian bush. Frank had been sharing stories about the creek's ecosystem, explaining how the platypus fit into the delicate balance of predator and prey, when a ripple appeared in the water just a few meters away. "Don't move," Frank whispered. Miriam froze, her camera resting in her lap. Slowly, impossibly slowly, a sleek brown shape broke the surface. Two small dark eyes regarded them for a moment, and then the platypus lifted its bill, water streaming from its fur like liquid silver in the morning light. Miriam raised her camera with movements so gradual they barely registered as motion. The platypus watched her, seemingly curious rather than afraid, and then, just as her finger pressed the shutter, it dove, but not in panic. The dive was graceful, almost playful, as if the creature was showing off what it could do. When Miriam lowered her camera and looked at the image on the screen, her breath caught. The photograph was perfect. The platypus, captured in a moment of transition between worlds, half emerged from the water, utterly itself. "It let you see it," Frank said softly, wonder in his voice. "After all these weeks, it finally let you see it." Miriam smiled, thinking about everything that phrase could mean. Maybe it just needed to trust that I wasn't there to harm it, that I only wanted to appreciate what made it special. Frank nodded slowly, his eyes still on the water where the platypus had disappeared. Maybe we all need that. 6 months later, Miriam returned to Willow Creek for the opening of Frank Morrison's first art exhibition. The gallery had been set up in the nearby town's community center, and to Frank's astonishment, nearly 200 people had shown up. Miriam watched from the back of the room as Frank stood before his largest painting, a sprawling canvas that depicted the creek at twilight, with the suggestion of something mysterious just beneath the surface. He was speaking to a reporter, his voice steadier than she had expected, his shoulders straighter than she had ever seen them. "For years, I thought hiding was the same as protecting myself," Frank was saying. "But hiding and living are very different things. I spent decades believing that my differences made me less than, that the world had no place for someone like me. It took a photographer with too much patience and a very stubborn platypus to show me otherwise." The reporter laughed, but Frank's expression remained thoughtful. "The platypus teaches us something important," he continued. "It doesn't try to be a duck or a beaver or an otter. It doesn't apologize for being unusual. It just lives its life, does what it was made to do, and trusts that there's room in the world for a creature that defies easy categories." He paused, his eyes finding Miriam across the crowded room. "I'm 72 years old, and I'm finally learning to do the same." After the exhibition, Miriam and Frank walked together along the creek one last time. The stars were emerging overhead, and somewhere in the darkness, platypuses were going about their nightly business, hunting, swimming, being their extraordinary selves. "Thank you," Frank said, "for seeing me, for not letting me stay hidden." Miriam squeezed his arm. "You were never really hidden, Frank. You were just waiting for the right moment to surface." Frank chuckled. "Like a platypus." "Exactly like a platypus." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the creek. The soft splash of water, the rustle of reeds, the occasional call of a night bird. "You know," Frank said eventually, "Marcus would have liked you. He always appreciated people who saw the world differently. I would have liked him too." Frank nodded, a peaceful expression settling over his features. "I think I'm finally ready to stop regretting what I didn't do and start appreciating what I still can. Every day above the surface is a gift, right?" Miriam smiled, thinking of all the creatures in the world who had evolved to be exactly what they needed to be. Strange and wonderful and perfectly themselves. "Every single day," she agreed. As they walked back toward Frank's cabin, a ripple broke the surface of the creek beside them. For just a moment, a sleek brown shape emerged, regarded them with knowing eyes, and then dove back into the darkness. The platypus had never needed to apologize for existing. It had only needed to embrace the extraordinary gift of being unlike anything else in the world. And finally, after 72 years, Frank Morrison had learned to do the same.